The overall problem that we're having in Malaysia is that for the past 60 years since the independence of the country, Malaysia has been governed and ruled by the same single political party or coalition. So over years, power has accumulated and there's a lot of abuses that has happened because as time goes by, more oppression, more violations have happened, and the government has also gotten very arrogant in terms of their confidence and the powers that they have. So leading up to elections, we see worsening trends because we have a regime or government that is insecure in terms of its powers. So recently, in last month, they rushed through a new legislation in Parliament called the Anti-Fake News Law, which I think is the first of a kind in the world, aimed basically to curtail citizens and politicians' freedom of expression leading up to the elections. But on the other hand, because it's election season, the government is also very mindful in terms of how far does it want to go in terms of violating its rights, because you know that will cost them votes in the upcoming elections. But what's more concerning for us is actually post-elections, because if the same Barisan Nasional political party wins the election again, we might see a series of crackdown aimed at activists and also politicians. This has happened in the last general elections. After the last general elections, there was about 60 over activists that were charged under the Sedition Act. So we might see similar trend happening in the next 1 year or so. Democratic spaces and civic rights is shrinking in Malaysia is because we have a system of democracy and governance that is very weak in terms of its structures. Primarily because power is very concentrated in the executive and in Prime Minister's hand in particular. The Prime Minister has influence and effective control over the police, the judiciary, parliament and so forth. So there is very little mechanisms or structures to keep the executive or the Prime Minister accountable and in check in terms of their actions. Secondly, because it's election seasons, one of the root causes of why democracy is still a struggle in Malaysia is because of our election system. The integrity of our election system is a serious issue. In the last general elections, we have an independent People's Tribunal which concluded that there were serious flaws in the integrity of our election system. And that is a major issue because without elections, properly functioning elections, there's no way to kick out a government that is oppressive and regressive in terms of democracy. So that is a major issue that we are facing as well in terms of Malaysia. Bersih started off as simply a campaign by civil society to advocate for institutional reform in terms of elections. It was founded in 2007 and we had the first major Bersih rally in 2007. But since then we have grown to become one of the largest, if not the largest, existing people's movement in Malaysia. Because when we had the first Bersih rally in 2007, it gave hope to a lot of Malaysians who wanted change and improve democracy in Malaysia. Subsequently, we had 4 other major rallies in 2011, 2013, 2014 and 2016. And in each mass rally, Bersih rally, we have hundreds of thousands of people going on the streets because they want change. They want reform and they want an aim to the abuse of election system to keep someone in power. So that's the people's movement aspect of Malaysia, of Bersih, where a lot of Malaysians actually look up to Bersih as an independent, non-partisan movement to fight for the rights of the people. More specifically, Bersih does a lot of work on election monitoring, keeping check of the work of the Election Commission, which is has serious flaws as well. And for example, in this upcoming general elections, every day we've been receiving a lot of complaints of cheating happening, manipulation happening in terms of elections. So it's our role to monitor, to expose, and also take corrective actions within what we can do. It's very challenging for civil society in Malaysia because on one hand we have very passionate civil society and activists who have been fighting for change and human rights for many years. But on the other hand, you have a government which is so arrogant in terms of what it does because it has unfettered powers and controls over many institutions and so forth. So it feels like sometimes civil society is just banging its head against the wall, a very big giant wall, hoping and advocating for change, and government is basically not responsive, and on the other hand is taking actions to repress a lot of our activities and a lot of our campaigns. But I think civil society in Malaysia has not given up. We have persisted for many years, and if you look at the long history of civil society in Malaysia, we have made progressive gains in terms of getting better democratic systems and cultures and institutions in Malaysia. So we will continue to do that. The upcoming elections will be very critical because if we have a regime change, then that opens up a whole new space to advocate for reforms and better democracy. If the Barisan National regime continues to be in power, then civil society perhaps needs to re-strategize and think what are the best options and best actions in the next 5 years in the long term in terms of getting what we want. I'll give you one very good example. Yesterday, the Election Commission has just came up with a sudden ruling that campaign materials must only have pictures or faces of the candidates and also the top political leaders within that party. And there is of course a political context to it. They don't want the photograph of Tun Mahathir, which is the former Prime Minister, to be on campaign materials. That is one perhaps very trivial, but it gives you a sense of the kind of control and restrictions that the Election Commission is imposing on political parties in upcoming general elections, to the extent that they want to control what you put in your campaign materials and what you disseminate to the people. That's one. During the campaigning period, from past practices, you will see that the police or Election Commission will disallow some campaign activities by political parties, especially the opposition parties, and they will find many reasons to do it. They will say that it's not safe to do it here, so they ask you to move somewhere further. Sometimes they say that, oh, we received report that there's a group who will come and cause havoc and chaos, so we want you to cancel the event. So these are the past tricks that they use to curtail and limit the freedom of expression and association of political parties. The third one, I think, is very important and increasingly a concerning trend in Malaysia is on the online space. Last month, Malaysia has just passed the first ever in the world anti-fake news law, specifically we think aimed at curtailing freedom of expression in the online space. Besides the anti-fake news law, which is very vague and very prone to misuse, we have also existing laws such as the Multimedia Communications Act, which has been used in the past 2-3 years to criminalize people for making a comment on Facebook or Twitter against the Prime Minister, for example. So these are basically some of the actions and tools that the government will continue to use in the upcoming elections. I think the international solidarity and support from NGOs, civil society and foreign missions all around the world for us is very important, because domestically we are faced with a government and regime that is so stubborn and resistant to change. So any added eyes, monitoring and pressure from the regional and international community is very important, and the government is one thing about the Malaysian government is it's very conscious about its self-image and reputation at the international arena. So any single questions or pressure or mechanisms that puts Malaysia and the government in the spotlight, it's very important to let the government basically know that the world is watching them. Malaysia is on the spotlight, especially in this election period, and especially in deterring the kind of electoral fraud that might happen in these upcoming elections. We have in Malaysia domestic election observers to observe, monitor and prevent electoral fraud, but we lack the kind of international advocacy and lobbying that needs to happen in the many different regional or institutional, international institutions such as the UN and so forth. So we appreciate all the support, the help, and especially for the people in Malaysia. I think the solidarity amongst people to people, people's movement to people's movement, civil society to civil society across borders is very important in order to keep the spirits high, to let everyone know that we are not alone in this. Similar people across the globe is facing similar challenges, and let's improve and defend democracy and human rights together. In Malaysia, I think civil society and people are ready for a regime change because, like I mentioned, for 60 years we have been ruled by one single political party which has gone very corrupt and arrogant in its ways. So the hope is in the upcoming elections we will see a change in power in terms of the regime, not because we like the opposition so much, but because we think that a two-party system or a change of power is necessary to improve the state of governance and democracy in Malaysia. Because that's good, because then it keeps politicians and elected officials on their toes, because they know that if they don't perform or if they do something wrong, they can be voted out in the next elections. So we are hoping that this will be the first time in 60 years that we will undergo a change in terms of governance. But having said that, the challenges are steep, and we are working very hard towards that, and we hope that a change and better democratic spaces will open up through these elections.